The blizzard didn't just erase the road. It erased the line between a routine mountain retreat and a high-stakes federal conspiracy when an elderly couple stumbled onto the porch of a retired FBI agent with a bullet-riddled secret. Elena Gray Vance and her K-9 partner, Bones, weren't looking for a mission, but the bruised ribs and terrified eyes of the strangers at their door proved that the storm outside was nothing compared to the monsters following them. Before we unravel this frozen nightmare, subscribe to the channel and join our community. Also, comment with the city you are watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The wind screamed with the voice of 1,000 ghosts against the cedar logs of the cabin. It was a night where the Colorado Rockies reclaimed everything they had ever lent to humanity. Elena Gray. Vance didn't flinch as the windows rattled in their frames. She had spent 33 years learning that the most dangerous things in the world didn't make a sound until they were already at your throat. She adjusted her FBI jacket over her thermal shirt, her dark blonde hair pulled into a tight, practical knot that signaled she was still a soldier even in her soul's exile. "Bones, settle," she whispered, though the massive German shepherd hadn't moved. He was a coiled spring of black and tan muscle, his ears tracking the rhythmic thumping of snow against the door. He wasn't sleeping. He was listening to the frequencies of the storm that Elena could only feel in the ache of her old field injuries. Then, the frequency shifted. Bones's head snapped up. A low, guttural vibration rolled through his chest that wasn't a growl, but a tactical alert. "I hear it too, boy," Elena muttered, her hand instinctively drifting toward the folding knife on the counter. There was a knock. It was weak, desperate, the sound of someone who had run out of hope miles ago. Elena opened the door, and the winter exploded into her living room, bringing with it two figures who looked more like ice sculptures than people. "Please," the woman gasped, her silver hair matted with sleet. "My husband. He can't breathe." George Parker collapsed into Elena's arms, his wool coat soaked with something far warmer and stickier than melted snow. "Get him to the stove! Now!" Elena barked, her FBI training overriding the exhaustion of her self-imposed isolation. She didn't just see a man in distress. She saw a victim of blunt force trauma. As she cut away George's coat, her breath hitched. The bruise spreading across his 78-year-old ribs wasn't from a fall. "Evelyn, tell me the truth," Elena said, her eyes boring into the woman's terrified face. "Who did this to him?" "They said we were failing compliance," Evelyn whispered, her hands shaking so violently the hot tea Elena had provided splashed onto the table. "They came with smiles and papers. Then they came with boots." George groaned, his hand clutching a frayed canvas satchel like it was his last lung. "They didn't want the land. They wanted us silent." Bones nudged George's hand, a grounding pressure that seemed to anchor the old man to the present. Elena leafed through the documents in the satchel, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the forgeries, dates that overlapped, signatures that didn't match, and the unmistakable stench of a corporate land grab masked as environmental regulation. "Frontier Timber," Elena muttered, reading the header. "I know these names." Suddenly, Bones stood and moved to the window, his body squared toward the ridge road. Through the swirling white, Elena saw the headlights of a dark pickup truck die instantly. They were being watched. "He's 78, Elena. Please don't let them take him," Evelyn pleaded, her voice breaking the silence of the cabin. "They won't," Elena said, her voice dropping into a register that made the room feel smaller, safer, and infinitely more dangerous for anyone outside. But this isn't just about a ranch anymore. They followed you for the papers in this bag, didn't they? Evelyn nodded slowly, pulling a small, discolored vial from the bottom of the satchel. It's not just the land. The creek is dying, and they're the ones killing it. The mini-climax hit when a heavy thud echoed from the porch. Not a knock, but the sound of someone testing the deadbolt. Elena didn't reach for her badge. She reached for the tactical gear she had hidden beneath the floorboards. "Bones, guard the rear," she commanded, her voice a whip crack in the small space. She looked at the elderly couple, realized they were the only witnesses to a multi-million-dollar environmental crime, and felt the fire of her old life ignite. "You think you can hide from the world, Agent Vance?" A voice called out from the darkness of the porch, muffled by the wind but sharp with malice. Elena froze. She recognized that voice. It belonged to a man she had testified against 3 years ago, a man who should have been in a federal cell. The major twist landed with a sickening thud. Frontier Timber wasn't just a company. It was the retirement plan for the very agents who had betrayed her in Denver. "The storm didn't bring them to my door," Elena whispered to Bones, her eyes reflecting the glowing embers of the stove. "My past did." Elena's jaw tightened as the voice from the porch shattered the fragile sanctuary of the cabin, making the air feel thinner than the mountain oxygen outside. The man's words weren't just a threat. They were a ghost from her failed Denver case, a shadow she thought she had outrun in these woods. Evelyn clutched George's hand, her eyes wide with the realization that their refuge was now a target, while George's shallow breathing hitching in time with the wind's howl. Elena didn't hesitate. She reached into the canvas satchel, pulling out the deeds and reports with a cold, calculated precision that left no room for the doubt that had plagued her months ago. "George, Evelyn, listen to me carefully," Elena whispered, her voice a low vibration that commanded attention over the rattling glass. "This isn't just about timber anymore. It's about the people who sold out the badge to line their pockets with Frontier's blood money." The first mini-climax hit when a heavy metallic thud echoed from the back of the cabin, the sound of a prying bar against the reinforced window frame. Bones didn't bark. He merely pivoted, his muscles rippling under his thick coat as he planted his front paws in a tactical stance that signaled he was no longer just a companion, but a weapon of the state. Elena signaled Evelyn to stay low, moving toward the shadows with a fluid grace that mocked the fatigue etched into her pale face. "You think the storm will cover your tracks, Miller?" She projected toward the door, her hand closing around the grip of her tactical flashlight like a talisman. The major twist landed when George, despite his bruised ribs, pulled a small encrypted thumb drive from the lining of his wool coat, a piece of evidence Evelyn hadn't even known he possessed. "They didn't just beat me because I wouldn't sign, Agent Vance," George rasped, his voice thick with a pain that transcended the physical. "I saw the barrels they were burying by the creek. I saw the names on the manifests, names from your own office. The revelation that the corruption wasn't just local, but deeply embedded in her former unit. So turned the cabin from a hideout into a trap with no clean exits." Elena realized then that the anonymous weather alerts on her radio had been jammed, replaced by a low-frequency hum that indicated a professional surveillance sweep was closing in. As the cabin lights flickered and died, leaving only the amber glow of the wood stove to illuminate Bones's bared teeth, Elena knew the night had just officially begun. The darkness inside the cabin became a living thing, heavy with the scent of pine resin and the metallic tang of fear as Elena navigated the shadows with the lethal precision of a hunter who had become the prey. She felt Evelyn's trembling hand brush against her tactical jacket, a silent plea for a miracle that Elena wasn't sure she could deliver. George, the thumb drive. If those names are who I think they are. We aren't just fighting a timber company. We're fighting a federal shadow, Elena whispered, her voice barely a ghost of a sound over the groaning timber of the walls. The first mini-climax hit when the front door didn't just rattle, but buckled under a single massive kick that sent a spray of ice through the cracks. Bones launched himself forward, not with a bark, but with a bone-chilling snarl that stopped the intruder's momentum for one heartbeat, just long enough for Elena to shove the Parkers behind the cast-iron stove. Elena, they're here for the satchel. They don't care if we're buried in the snow or in the dirt. George gasped, the pain in his ribs flaring as he tried to shield his wife with his own battered body. A major twist landed when a flare ignited outside, bathing the cabin in a hellish red glow that revealed not just one pickup truck, but a perimeter of 3 vehicles closing the circle. The voice from the porch returned, dripping with a terrifying familiarity. "Give us the drive, Gray. You've already lost one partner to this case. Don't let a couple of seniors be the next." Elena's heart froze. The intruder knew about the Denver failure because he had been the one to pull the trigger on her partner, a betrayal that reached into the very soul of the FBI. The mini-climax peaked as the side window shattered, and a canister of gas hissed across the floor, its white smoke coiling like a snake toward the Parkers. Elena snatched a wet towel, pressing it to Evelyn's face while Bones dragged George by his collar toward the cellar trapdoor. "We're going down, but we aren't staying down," Elena hissed, her eyes stinging as she realized the jamming signal on her radio was getting stronger. Someone was moving a mobile tower into the clearing. The profound cliffhanger struck when Elena reached for her emergency satellite phone, only to find the line already open. A voice she hadn't heard in years whispered, "They aren't just coming for the papers, Elena. They're coming to finish what they started in the mountains." Elena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she shoved the trapdoor open, the ancient wood groaning under the weight of a betrayal that had followed her for 3 long years. The gas was coiling across the floorboards like a living predator, stinging her eyes and blurring the desperate faces of the Parkers. "Down! Get down now!" she hissed, her voice a jagged blade that cut through Evelyn's muffled sobs. The first mini-climax hit when a heavy tactical boot shattered the kitchen window, sending a spray of glass shards raining over George's huddled form. Bones launched himself from the shadows, a 4-legged blur of fury that intercepted the intruder before his feet even touched the floor. "Elena, they're not just here for the papers," George wheezed, clutching the encrypted drive as he tumbled into the dark, damp cellar. "They're here to make sure we're just another statistic in a winter storm." Elena slammed the trapdoor shut just as the front entrance buckled under a secondary breach, the wood splintering into white-hot shrapnel. The major twist landed when Elena's satellite phone vibrated in her palm, but the voice wasn't a rescue team. It was her former mentor from the Denver field office. "Elena, listen to me," the voice whispered through the static, sounding more like a threat than a warning. "The Frontier timber contracts are tied to the director's pension fund. If you walk out of that cabin with those files, you're walking into a firing squad." The mini-climax peaked as Elena realized the very organization she had dedicated her life to was now the one holding the leash of the men above her head. "I'm not walking out, sir," Elena growled, her eyes reflecting the cold, dim light of the cellar. I'm fighting my way out. Evelyn grabbed Elena's sleeve, her frail hands shaking with a terror that transcended the physical cold. They're pouring something. Elena, I smell gasoline. The profound cliffhanger struck as the first orange lick of flame danced through the cracks in the ceiling, turning the cabin into a tinderbox. Elena looked at Bones, then at the terrified couple, and finally at the secondary exit she had dug herself months ago, a narrow tunnel leading straight into the heart of the blizzard. We move now, or we burn together, she commanded, the hunter finally fully awake in her soul. The gasoline roared to life above their heads, the heat pressing down through the floorboards like a physical hand. But Elena didn't flinch as she shoved George and Evelyn toward the narrow, dirt-choked tunnel. The first mini-climax hit when a massive beam from the cabin ceiling groaned and shattered, sending a cascade of sparks into the cellar that nearly ignited Evelyn's frayed coat. Keep moving. Don't look back! Elena barked, her voice a jagged rasp in the smoke-filled darkness as she felt Bones's solid, warm flank pressing against her leg in the cramped space. Bones moved first, his powerful K9 frame clearing the way through the frozen earth of the escape crawl space while George wheezed, his bruised ribs flaring with every agonizing inch of progress. The major twist landed when they emerged into the blinding white of the blizzard and found that the pickup trucks weren't just circling. They had deployed a mobile jamming unit that was now emitting a high-frequency scream, masking the sound of their escape. They think we're still in the fire, Elena, Evelyn whispered, her face pale and wind-burned, clutching the canvas satchel to her chest, as if it were the only anchor left in a world gone mad. Suddenly, a flashlight beam sliced through the swirling snow, missing Elena's head by mere inches. The mini-climax peaked as a man in a camo jacket stepped from behind a pine tree, his eyes locking onto the elderly couple. Elena didn't hesitate. She signaled Bones with a silent hand gesture, and the German shepherd launched himself through the waist-deep drifts, a blur of fur and fury that disarmed the intruder before he could raise his weapon. The profound twist struck when Elena's satellite phone finally bypassed the jamming, not connecting to the FBI, but to Margaret Lewis, the town's lawyer who had already been documenting the frontier timber fraud. Margaret, the data is live. The thumb drive George gave me is transmitting to the State Oversight Office right now. Elena shouted over the howling wind, her pulse racing as she realized the truth was finally outrunning the fire. The mini-climax escalated as the lead vehicle from Frontier Timber suddenly swerved, its headlights catching the red and blue strobes of a state patrol convoy, finally reaching the ridge. The director's pension fund and the corporate greed that had fueled the night were crumbling in real time as the federal authorities she actually trusted descended from the sky in a roar of rotors. As the morning light crept into Silver Pines, Elena stood with Bones beside the medical clinic where George was finally stable, watching the smoke from her cabin drift toward the peaks. Evelyn squeezed Elena's hand, her silver hair catching the sun as the land taken by deception was officially ordered back to its rightful owners. The town's guardian was no longer a ghost hiding from her past. She was the woman who had opened the only door that mattered when the winter tried to swallow the truth. Justice in the Rockies doesn't always arrive with thunder, but it always arrives for those brave enough to hold the light against the storm. Elena Vance was no longer running from the silence. She was finally home,